Have you ever wondered how people would react if you suddenly became unrecognizable? If you could no longer fulfill your role in their lives? Would they still love you? Would they stand by you? One morning, Gregor Samsa wakes up from disturbing dreams to find his body no longer human. He has transformed into a gigantic insect. This strange and horrifying event is the starting point of the Metamorphosis, one of Franz Kafka's most unsettling and powerful works. What would it feel like to wake up and realize the world sees you as something repulsive? Kafka doesn't give us a reason for Gregor's transformation. And maybe that's the point. The story isn't about how or why it happened, but about what it reveals. As the narrative unfolds, we watch Gregor struggle to make sense of his new, grotesque form. We see how his family, once dependent on him, now recoils in fear and revulsion. Through this surreal premise, Kafka explores some of the darkest aspects of human nature. Our fear of the unfamiliar, our tendency to turn away from those who can no longer serve us, and the crushing loneliness that follows. But what does this say about us? About the conditions we place on love, acceptance, and dignity? The Metamorphosis holds up a mirror, not just to Gregor's tragic fate, but to our own reactions, our own limits, and the way we often measure a person's worth. It's a story that leaves us with more questions than answers, and maybe that's what makes it unforgettable. Kafka's work encourages deep reflection on the psychological effects of fear, the stripping away of humanity, and the potential cruelty that lies within us, often hidden beneath the surface. Before examining these central ideas, it's important to understand the characters involved. The plot centers on four primary figures. Gregor, once a hard-working traveling salesman, is now trapped in a hideous insect body. Greta, his sister, starts off caring and empathetic, but slowly evolves into someone cold and unsympathetic. Gregor's father, gripped by panic, insists on keeping his transformed son confined and out of sight. The mother, torn between maternal love and emotional anguish, becomes increasingly overwhelmed by despair. With these multidimensional characters, the narrative draws us into an intense exploration of the human mind and behavior. A major theme that emerges is the destructive power of fear. Sigmund Freud, the famous Austrian psychoanalyst, proposed that fear can easily shift into anger if left unchecked. According to this theory, still influential in psychology today, when people are faced with a threat they cannot escape, they often respond with aggression as a defensive reaction. Kafka brings this transformation vividly to life through Gregor's past. Before his metamorphosis, he was the family's financial backbone, admired and relied upon. But once fear takes hold, triggered by his new form, everything changes. The affection and respect he once received give way to dread and disgust, unraveling familial bonds and revealing the darker instincts of those around him. Now that the narrative is set, we can delve deeper into the emotional and psychological dimensions Kafka presents in this powerful tale. At first, the family's fear seems grounded in practical concerns, chiefly that Gregor can no longer earn money, meaning they will have to fend for themselves. This shift brings unease and resistance. Yet beneath that practical anxiety lies a much more disturbing fear: the horror of what Gregor has become. It's not merely his grotesque appearance that unsettles them, it's what that transformation represents. The symbolism embedded in his condition provokes a deeper existential dread that the family is unable to confront. He remained the same person his family once cared for, but now his appearance was so drastically altered that he was no longer recognizable. This sudden and jarring transformation symbolized how delicate and uncertain life truly is, how everything familiar can vanish in a moment, without warning and without a way back. The initial fear his family felt quickly evolved into bitterness and aggression. Their behavior grew increasingly heartless. They avoided him entirely and treated him with cold detachment. Gregor was shut away in his room, where only his sister would occasionally come by to clean and drop off scraps of food. Whenever Gregor tried to step outside his confinement, he was met with violence. His father especially showed no mercy, driving him back with a cane each time he attempted to leave. One pivotal moment stands out. Overcome with rage, the father hurls an apple at Gregor. The fruit strikes him in the back and becomes lodged there, eventually becoming infected. That wound, left untreated, leads to his slow and painful death. The father's uncontrollable emotions, his panic and fury, ended up being the cause of his own son's demise. When Gregor passes away, the family's reaction is not sorrow, but relief. With him gone, it's as though a heavy burden has been lifted. Their mourning is fleeting, and they soon celebrate the disappearance of the creature they had come to fear, eager to begin a new chapter. At this point, Kafka delivers a striking commentary on the human condition. Often we respond with violence to what we do not understand, not because it threatens us directly, but because it exposes our vulnerabilities. Gregor's father, for instance, was terrified that his son's altered state might bring shame or dishonor to the family, a fear rooted more in social anxiety than any real danger. Kafka doesn't imply that fear or anger are inherently wrong. In situations involving genuine threats, those emotions can serve a purpose. What he cautions against, however, is allowing irrational fears and unchecked rage to dictate our behavior. Left uncontrolled, these feelings can wreak havoc, not just on others, but also on ourselves. Now let's take a moment to truly examine Gregor's emotional world. What was he feeling through all this? For those eager to explore ideas in philosophy and lifelong learning, I encourage you to subscribe and become part of this growing community. Let's now reflect on pride and the roles we play in society. I'd like to tell you about a woman I once met who had always aspired to become a top-tier mechanic. She was raised in a small town, learning the craft of car repair at her father's side in their home garage. Her hands were precise and skilled, and she found joy in restoring what was broken. After years of dedication and countless nights working late, she was finally on the brink of being promoted to head mechanic at a prestigious auto shop. Then everything shifted. One day while she was working beneath a vehicle, a heavy tool slipped and crushed her hand. The damage was extensive, and even after surgery and physical therapy, she was left with limited strength and movement. The profession she had devoted her life to was suddenly beyond her reach. Initially, she fell into a deep depression. Her identity, as someone who fixed problems and brought machines back to life, seemed lost. But with time, a new direction emerged. She turned to engineering, channeling her experience into designing auto parts. Her hands were no longer building cars directly, but her mind was creating the parts that made them run. Today, as a mechanical engineer, she feels the same satisfaction and passion she once felt turning wrenches in the family garage. Her journey teaches a powerful lesson. When we lose a piece of ourselves, especially a part that defines us, it can feel like the world has collapsed, but there's always the possibility of forming a new identity, one that's just as meaningful. This kind of transformation is something we all face at some point. Many people take pride in aspects of their character: kindness, empathy, generosity. For Mike Tyson, it was his strength and dominance in the ring. When those defining traits are stripped away, it's only natural to feel a deep emotional wound. Franz Kafka captured this idea beautifully in the Metamorphosis. After his transformation, Gregor is overwhelmed with anxiety about who he has become. He can no longer do his job, help his family financially, or even enjoy what he once loved. Foods that once delighted him now disgust him, while unfamiliar ones become appealing. His sadness is understandable. Everything that once gave his life direction has vanished. One of the most telling aspects of Gregor's story is his position as the main provider for his family. It highlights how the roles we play can give us both meaning and confinement. Being the breadwinner brought Gregor pride and a sense of purpose, but once he could no longer fulfill that role, he felt useless and fell into despair. Schopenhauer once argued that our ability to think and reflect pushes us to set goals. Achieving them brings fleeting happiness, but that satisfaction quickly fades, replaced by the next desire or ambition. When we fall short of these goals, we're hit with discouragement. Schopenhauer had a bleak view of this cycle, believing that the constant search for meaning only leads to suffering. But I see things differently. I believe humans are wired to strive. There's value in the struggle itself. As Camus suggests with his image of a content Sisyphus, the essence of life is found in the effort, in pushing forward, facing challenges, and chasing goals. The journey, not just the outcome, is where meaning truly lives. But what happens when the goals we set are no longer within reach, or when we push ourselves toward objectives that were never truly ours to begin with, expectations placed on us by others? And more troubling still, what do we do when we feel locked into roles we can't escape, afraid of the criticism or rejection that might follow if we tried? I don't claim to have final answers to these questions, but existentialist thought offers compelling perspectives worth considering. Sartre believed that living authentically means refusing to conform to roles that don't reflect our true selves. Nietzsche, meanwhile, urged us to break away from traditional moral codes and invent our own values, fueled by a strong and determined will. Camus, in his own way, invited us to abandon the hunt for grand meanings and instead focus on the raw experience of living. To me, the quest for meaning is an individual journey. I see existentialism not as a doctrine to obey, but as a quiet invitation, like a friend walking beside us, offering insights while also navigating their own uncertainties. Kafka stands out as a singular voice in exploring these existential dilemmas. His ability to express the emotional turmoil of characters grappling with meaning and identity is one reason his stories still move us so deeply today. The Metamorphosis is a shining example of this, where Kafka masterfully portrays Gregor's growing suffering. What I want to focus on now is the sense of hopelessness that surrounds Gregor's story. Despair is something nearly everyone experiences at some point, that crushing feeling that our life has veered off course and that we've become strangers to ourselves and those around us. In such times, it feels like hope is fading and those who once cared no longer see us. Gregor represents this internal collapse with painful clarity. After his transformation, he mourns not just the physical change, but the loss of his humanity. He yearns for the days when he could provide for his family and connect with others. Yet over time, we observe a shift in how he responds to his isolation. At first, despite his agony, Gregor still holds deep affection for his family, particularly his sister. When he notices her fear and disgust, he hides beneath the furniture during her visits, an effort to spare her, to preserve her image of him. It's a gesture that shows how much he still values their opinion and connection. However, as the days go by and his family remains cold and distant, Gregor's optimism erodes. His love turns sour. The man who once submitted quietly now begins to lash out. He climbs the walls, behaves in unsettling ways, no longer concerned with hiding. These actions are cries for recognition, desperate attempts to declare, "I still exist. Look at me." In this, Gregor reveals something profoundly human, our longing to be acknowledged, embraced, and understood by those closest to us. His transformation, from quiet acceptance to visible frustration, reflects the universal hunger for connection and validation, a truth Kafka conveys with haunting precision. The height of Gregor's suffering takes place when he finally leaves the confinement of his room and crawls into the kitchen. At that point, his father, overcome with anger, hurls an apple at him, wounding him badly, an injury that ultimately seals his fate. For Gregor, the shift from being neglected and shunned to becoming the target of outright hostility marks the most intense moment of his emotional collapse. It's the unmistakable expression of hatred that drives him into the final depth of despair. Drained of energy and emotionally shattered, Gregor gives up. His spirit broken, he retreats inward, relinquishing any desire to go on. He stops eating, moves very little, and seems to simply wait for death to arrive, his body racked by the toll of ongoing suffering. In his mind, Gregor envisions a release from pain, a quiet disappearance into the comfort of non-existence. His story delivers a haunting portrayal of how social exclusion and emotional neglect can break a person, pushing them back and forth between defiance and hopelessness. This isn't just fiction, it mirrors reality. How many people do you know who, after being cast aside or mistreated, are left bitter and resentful? There is a certain kind of emotional pain that, when ignored or left unresolved, transforms into intense anger, an anger aimed both outwardly and inwardly. This represents the second phase of Gregor's torment, his deep frustration and rage toward those who abandoned him. And when that anger burns out, after every attempt to be seen and accepted has failed, the person often has no choice but to descend even further into despair. Kafka's narrative invites us to reflect on just how devastating the consequences of abandonment can be. It's a reminder of the damage we might cause when we push someone away, even unintentionally. But there's another layer that runs through the entire story, one that is just as critical to acknowledge: shame. Shame is a powerful undercurrent, a quiet, persistent force that pulses through the story from beginning to end. Try to recall a time in your own life when you felt exposed and judged, so much so that you wanted to disappear. I remember an incident from a few years back when I cracked an ill-considered joke at a social gathering. I made a childish remark about someone's mother, forgetting entirely that she had passed away earlier that year. Thankfully, he wasn't offended, but the shame I felt afterward hit me hard. It was an insensitive moment that still resurfaces in my mind at the worst times, often when I'm trying to sleep. That mistake left a mark on me, a kind of emotional bruise I haven't fully shaken. I'm sure you've experienced something similar, that persistent sense of shame that lingers long after the moment has passed. It's one of the most common human emotions, and Kafka explores it with remarkable depth in the Metamorphosis. Shame touches every part of the characters' lives, silently shaping their actions and responses. Take Gregor, for instance. He is overwhelmed by guilt and embarrassment for no longer being able to financially support his family, for the monstrous way his body has changed, and for the emotional and physical toll his condition places on those he loves. His father, meanwhile, is forced to accept a low-ranking job as a bank attendant, a role he finds degrading. This humiliation only deepens his resentment and fuels the aggression he unleashes on Gregor. Gregor's mother, once deeply affectionate toward her son, can no longer bear to look at him. Her horror and shame over his altered form leave her emotionally paralyzed. The entire family, once proudly sustained by Gregor's income, is now forced to rent out part of their home to strangers who look down on them, mocking their reduced status even in their own living space. Shame binds all these characters together. Kafka uses it as a powerful critique of the societal forces that drive people into despair. He unveils the darker aspects of human behavior, showing how judgment and the relentless demand to fit in can crush individuals under their weight. Political philosopher Thomas Hobbes in Leviathan posited that people willingly surrender certain freedoms to gain the protection and stability that come from living in an organized society. In exchange for following laws and paying taxes, we're promised safety and order in our lives and homes. But this so-called social contract doesn't always function fairly. Often, its terms are not agreed upon directly, and instead of empowering us, societal expectations can feel more like oppressive obligations. Friedrich Nietzsche offered a pointed critique of such conformity. He believed that rigid social norms suffocate the true potential of extraordinary individuals. In a similar vein, Kafka exposes one of the most damaging tools society uses to shape human behavior: shame. It doesn't simply restrict, it programs us, making it almost impossible to reject imposed roles or live in a way that's genuinely free. Shame reflects the values a culture holds dear. In a religious state, for example, questioning sacred beliefs might bring about intense guilt. In a society obsessed with physical beauty, say one where long hair is idealized, going bald might provoke deep personal embarrassment. In the Metamorphosis, Kafka shows just how destructive shame can be. For Gregor's family, it arises directly from his metamorphosis. That shame, coupled with fear and disgust, leads them to withdraw from him emotionally, lock him away, and eventually mistreat him. In the end, when he dies, they don't grieve. Instead, they feel relieved, almost celebratory, treating his death as a kind of escape from an unbearable burden. Through this story and many others, Kafka reveals that shame isn't inherently good or bad. It's a morally neutral force, one that can be used to guide people toward decency, but also one that can be twisted into a weapon of cruelty, depending on how society chooses to use it. Kafka's message is clear. We must be mindful of the shame we experience and the shame we project onto others. Its effects can be far more devastating than they appear on the surface. A single act of humiliation might push someone toward choices they wouldn't otherwise consider. If this topic interests you and you want to explore more of Kafka's work, I suggest you stay connected for more insights on how we can bring these ideas into our daily lives.